I want to know, what's the strangest thing you have in your house?
Yeah, hold on a sec. So this is actually something that my wife desperately felt she needed, and I absolutely agree. And it's a box of teeth.
This is Box of Teeth, chewing over the stories behind the books, with our guest, Jarred McGinnis.
You begin the book with the distance between fiction and memoir is measured in self-delusions. As a sort of, could you expand on that for me a little bit?
Yeah, it's definitely a provocation. But it was also kind of in kind of my own kind of exploration of this and like how to choose the form. And it really was kind of like, what was the form that I was going to choose? Because, and that particularly is just saying that I just think it's impossible to tell your own story. And the harder you try, the kind of more it kind of slips through your fingers. And memoir, there's only story. I wasn't interested in the outlaying of fact or information about my personal life for whatever reason that people are motivated to write memoir. It wasn't interesting to me because largely I think it's inaccessible, and that's where that kind of message comes from. And I consciously read a lot of memoir to kind of understand like why does the reader care that there's a real person behind this and whether it's true or not. Like I knew I definitely didn't have the kind of stomach to deceive people. And so I wanted to make it very clear that this is a novel. Part of me kind of likes that. I like the idea of literary frauds and, there's a mischievous bit in me that kind of really enjoys that idea. And I very deliberately in the very beginning let the reader know that our histories are just stories we tell ourselves. And the interesting thing is the fact that this is important to certain memoir writers and that it is important that it is seen, and they are probably working through I always say there is intention. There's an intention to deceive, but then there's an intention to record fact. I think it's impossibility, but that's intention is what matters. And there are memoirists who are very deliberate about making sure they're getting it right. But you can't lie to me. I know what it's like to make a story. If you take two facts and you put them together, that's a story now. And that is no longer just, there's no objective anymore. You chose two facts and set them side by side. We're talking about story now.
Let's get into the story, I guess.
Sure.
It's super powerful. And I think the thing that I was most impressed by is the characterization and the dialogue. So much of it is dialogue. How was it diving into those conversations? Presumably there are sort of a patchwork of conversations that perhaps you've had and those you wish you had had.
Well, it's right down to the kind of the craft. So, I mean, in a former life, I would have been a screenwriter. I mean, film was my first love, and I was interested in screenwriting and the voices. In all my fiction, I wrote lots of short stories before that. It was always the voice. It's always voice led, and Jack was in the Navy. I don't think I ever mentioned it. But there's things in his character. Yeah. So, but to me, that's how well I know him. Like Jack was definitely in the military, but there's certain things he says that come from kind of Navy speak. And so from that, you kind of get this voice in your head. And I'm still writing kind of repartee between these two characters because I've got them down so much. So I'll have a situation, I'll see something. And then Jarred and Jack will have a conversation in my head, and I'm like, you know what? I need to just put this down. I don't need this anymore. So I think with all the characters, I tried to make sure they were quite distinctive. Even kind of small characters, I wanted to feel real. I didn't want anyone just being moving the plot.
Was it always going to start with the accident that puts Jarred in a wheelchair and kills Melissa, this person who we don't know much about for much of the novel, at least half the novel?
Yeah.
How many variations? I mean, this is when you ultimately chose, probably always certainly the right and strongest one, but.
Yeah. So, I mean, structurally, the book has two threads. It's the past and the present. And so, I could have written it from kind of like, cradle to grave, as it were. But I knew there's going to be some really heavy work and some really emotional things for the reader to do. And I wanted to balance that. I didn't want to do like the Thomas Hardy, like just dive into misery, just the unrelenting, don't open that closet type stuff. And so the structure in my mind was that, like, basically in the present, he starts at the nadir and things steadily improve. But to do that, he has to revisit his past, in which they start at the high point and go down to the nadir, which brings you back to the front of the book. So you deliberately don't find out what happens to him, because of that. To me, that's you've earned it. You have gone on this emotional journey with Jarred. You now can find out what happened to him, right? He's got all these people going, what happened to you? It was in that chapter, right? All these strangers going, what happened to you? They don't care about him. And that's something when you have a physical disability. People want to know what happened, and they don't care. It's curiosity, right? So, and that was how I made the reader earn that, through that kind of emotional journey. And if you've come this far, you deserve to know where the roots of his pain were. And that's also where the humor comes in, is, to kind of, I'm kind of sadistic in one way, is I like the humor to bring you up, so I can see if, as a writer, I can bring you down too. I want all those notes. I want to be able to express all those things of our emotional experience as humans. Like, we're all over the place. And I joy and sadness can be right next to each other, adjacent.
Well, is when they're most obvious. And that's interesting, that mirroring of the reader's experience and the relationship between Jack and Jarred in the novel, because, like you said, the reader's working to find out what's happened to Jarred. Yeah. But also Jack doesn't know. Jack is so unaware of the details of Jarred's last decade, 10 years, and the accident. And
deliberately so, right? Jarred was not going to let that go, and not let that, he was still carrying these wounds. And so, like, he was fighting these 10-year-old battles that Jack had made his peace with. And there is conflict, and therein conflict is fiction. So yeah, it's good.
So it was, we had an exchange over email, and I'm a little bit worried to ask you what your box teeth is. There was a few contenders.
So that's it. Like, again, I grew up in Florida. Like, the bar is very high for weird. Like, and some of the things that I used from my real life, I couldn't have written in a novel, because everyone would be like, that's a bit much, Jarred. Like, there's a particular thing. There's some certain things. Well, there's like one, like, there's a scene with a therapy dog.
Right. Right.
And someone reminded me, it was like, it wasn't a therapy dog, Jarred. It was an iguana. Somebody had brought me in the hospital a therapy iguana. Like, I couldn't have written that. People, especially in the beginning of the book, people are like, I'm done. This is nonsense. This is insane. But like,
you can get that into a short story. We need to hear about.
Yeah, that's there now, and I got it. And if you read my short stories, you can see that I am part of that Gothic grotesque tradition of, like, when you're around this much weirdness, like, it's weird. Like, in Texas, the municipal workers on the side of the street, the guys who are like fixing the roads and all that kind of thing, their hard hats are in the shape of cowboy hats.
No.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking, like, when you're a fiction writer, you gotta really, like, bring it, because, like, you're sitting there. Meanwhile, there's a guy with an AR-15 buying donuts beside you. Like, it's crazy. So, like, yeah, my fiction was always going to be kind of full on and, like, lurid. Like, I always say, like, I'm a lurid writer. I'm a very visual writer. Yeah. And I think it was inevitable, and, like, just my memoir will be freaking nuts. Yeah. Like, you know, that weirdness, it's just kind of, it snaps you out of thinking about all the daily nonsense. And that's definitely something I think about when I write, is like, how do you, and that's where you, from the short story, that's really where you cut your teeth about, like, you can't waste any time. There's no fat. How do you snap this person out of the kind of mundane nonsense that's rolling around in their head and get them to pay attention to your words? Short story is just such a training ground for a prose writer. And the novel's another form, and you got to learn a lot, and you got to unlearn a lot of things. And a lot of the work was kind of short storying this and being a little bit more generous and understanding that the attention span for a novel is different than a short story. And yeah, you can't.
I think it's almost like poetry. It's got to be so controlled, so contained. And I mean, I admire the best. George Saunders, I mean, is an obvious example of somebody who should.
I always say I'm a frustrated poet. If I was any better, I would do what they can do. And I'm always kind of like making fun of poets just because I'm jealous, because they just in a paragraph, they do more work than it took me 80,000 words, and it's just annoying that way.
Well, they break all the rules, don't they? They shatter, they release words, they completely break language towards meaning in a way.
But and I think that's how it was intended. That's how, you know, the kind of monkeys around the campfire.
Yeah,
they knew it was just noises. I mean, imagine the first guy, you know, that's just, you know, and the ancients used to know, like, they were scared of the power of words, right? To know someone's secret name meant to hold power over them. Yeah. And we've lost that. And you can see it now, like all the meaningless chatter. You know, it's interesting, like, we hold fiction writers more accountable than politicians about whether it's true or not, right? I get a harder time than Boris Johnson, you know, about whether it's true or not. And it's just really, as somebody who just adores language and its power, and it really annoys me that there's just a flagrant disregard for its majesty. And that's the only way I could put it. I am kind of and that's where that Southern thing comes into me. I'm evangelical. My church happens to, you know, to be bookstores, you know, thank God. So I told you about the thing, this was my object.
Nice.
So this is a little baby grow. So when my first daughter was born, we got her this little baby grow. But my wife is quite good at making clothes. So she added a third arm. Like this, yeah. And what's brilliant about this, when the kid is in there, it really looked like her third arm.
Yeah, the picture.
And
is the child real? Like, I was trying to figure out what is real and what's not. So initially,
because I was a stay-at-home dad, but I was like a guy in a wheelchair and a stay-at-home dad. So like already people are like, what is going on? Like, this guy is pushing a pram and then pushing a wheelchair, and like, you know, he talks funny, he's got a funny accent and all this kind of, so like, then I put the baby in that thing, and it was brilliant. Like, because it was in England, like nobody said anything. They would just, you know, these little ladies be like, oh, she's lovely. And I posted something on Facebook, and the family started doing it. Like, I have this extended family, so they're all gossiping, like, what's wrong with Jarred's baby? It's got 3 arms.
What's going to be interesting is when your child looks back in photographs when they're older, and they're like, Dad, did I have an extra arm?
Yeah, that's my weird object. But yeah, we got all kinds of things. I have a painting of my wife and I as Judith and Holofernes. I got it to for our 10th wedding anniversary, so she's like cutting my head off.
Yeah, I need to start spending more money on odd things, like, and stop making.
I mean, I love commissioning. When I have this thing called a special relationship, which is kind of making kind of live literary events, and my favorite bit is just collaborating with artists. That's actually from the book. That's this was Bagshaw, Hannah Bagshaw. That's an illustrator there that did, that's Jack's glass. And part of my pleasure of that is just commissioning artists and paying artists to make stuff, because it's just great, and the collaboration, I'm a very visual, my influences are visual. Is why there's art everywhere. Because that's how that's where it comes from, and that's how I get translated into prose and stuff. But yeah, so I guess my object would be a 3-armed baby grow.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Jarred. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been everything I kind of thought it would be.
Callum, man, it was really brilliant. It's some great questions, and it was just nice to kind of talk about structure and all that kind of writery stuff that I just that's the meat and potatoes. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.